Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Workshop Wednesday. I am Jennifer Slattery, Director of Training and Membership for the League of Cities and Towns. So just back from vacation, you can tell my brain isn't quite caught up. But welcome. Glad to have a good group here today. We have once again are joined by our friends from the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. So without further ado, I will toss it over to Bill Fazioli. Hi, Bill.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. It's tough. It's a re-entry week for a lot of people coming back from a long weekend with the holiday period. But we really appreciate the opportunity to work with the league again to have these sessions and offer some helpful information for some upcoming funding opportunities that Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank is offering, and also to discuss about some other opportunities that are out there, not necessarily offered by the Infrastructure Bank, but ways that we could perhaps assist communities interested in receiving some benefits from some new IRS regulations. So just going to start with a very brief overview of the bank for the folks who aren't familiar with the bank, but the bank's been around since 1989 and has really become a centralized hub of infrastructure investment over the last 30 plus years. And I know a lot of people on the call today have worked with the bank either on our water and sewer projects, climate resiliency, road and bridge, and all of that. So we're, just want to make sure that people realize that we have a wide suite of financing options available to communities. Just to put in context, since inception, the bank has involved over $2.5 billion of financings for Rhode Island communities, and that money constantly gets recycled back into our program. So the funds get replenished. In 2016, we greatly expanded the amount of projects that we could help finance. Traditionally, it was primarily drinking water and clean water, but now we do things like efficient building, clean energy, a lot of resiliency work, which we'll talk about today, and so on. So the bank really has taken that step where, on a national level, a lot of state revolving loan fund programs don't have this wide suite of services. So we're excited to share that with our communities here in Rhode Island. But a lot of other states don't have this wide range. And again, just sort of the highlights of why we want to work with the bank. And I think it's obviously the wide range of financing opportunities. And the fact that we're providing more technical assistance free to our borrowers. We understand that it's difficult for borrowers to access professional engineering firms and all of that. So, if you do contact us, we do have the ability to provide free technical assistance for projects that are being contemplated. And of course, we offer below market interest rates, which is always a great thing to ease the expense in financing these capital services, capital investments. So today we're going to talk about a series of things. We're going to talk about our new upcoming municipal resiliency program that we have up and running. In addition, we have Melissa Labuda, who's going to be with PFM out of the Philadelphia office, who's going to talk about some new IRS regulations that can benefit tax-exempt entities that traditionally have not had to file taxes or deal with the IRS, but there's some exciting programs there that again can help cities and towns offset the cost of some capital investments that deal with clean energy. So if we go to the next slide, Anthony, we'll have you take it over. So very happy to introduce Anthony Hebert. A lot of you are familiar with Anthony. He was with the city of Pawtucket for a number of years. He came with the bank in the fall of 2023 and has really, sort of been the bank's person in overseeing the municipal resiliency program, which is offering another round of funding. So Anthony, if you want to lead us through that section, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So I'll go into the current round of MRP in just a moment, but first just want to take a minute to recognize that resilience efforts around are a team effort, that the bank has so many different partners around the state for local, state agencies, nonprofits, just a few, Rhode, CRMC, OER, the Nature Conservancy, Save the Bay, and a whole host of others that you see here on the board, as well as probably a few others aren't even listed. But it has to be a team effort if we're really going to tackle resilience and the issues affecting the state around climate change, especially when it comes to flooding. So we're happy to work with so many of our state partners and a team effort move a lot of our priorities forward. So today I'm going to talk about our open round of MRP. This is our fourth round. The program began in 2020, and this is our fourth round of action grants. So it's an overview, and then I'll go into the current round that's open and where we are for that and some of the priorities we have for this. So for approximately 19.5 million has been allocated to date from the MRP action grants, and it's a total of 48 statewide projects. The most recent was 12 million awarded in January of 2024, our largest MRP funding round to date. Majority applications, they do span a couple of different areas, but majority are related to stormwater improvements and coastal resiliency efforts. In the last round, I think stormwater applications exceeded 25 million, coastal resiliency applications exceeded 10 million. The awards do have a pretty wide range, so the smallest award we've done is 24,000, and the largest one that we did in the last round was 2.3 million. So we've seen, as we kind of ramped up over the past few years with MRP, that we've expanded capacity to support larger projects and have greater impact around the state. Traditionally, it's been a mix of design and construction projects, so we do have a lot of applications that come in that are for design and construction. Some are for just design and permitting, get them off the ground, get some cost estimates. And we've been shifting the program in the past year or so that we are still funding design and permitting, and those projects combined together with construction, but there's been some shift towards construction and shovel-ready projects. So seeing a project that's approaching shovel readiness or at shovel readiness is really what makes a competitive application with the bank, and trying to get the funds out the door quickly to have the most impact and start construction around the state to make those improvements. And just a quick note that after this funding round, the next one will be expected probably in the second quarter of 2025, assuming voter approval of the next green economy bond this fall. So a little bit about this current round that's open is the RFP is now live. It's on the Rhode website. It opened in the last week of May, and it closes on the 26th of this month at noon. All applications can be emailed to myself, ahebert@rib.org, and you can find the instructions online, how to send it, the format of the documents, and things like that. Once we get applications in, we'll convene a review committee made by our partners around the state, go through the applications, score them, and we expect to announce the awards around September of this year. We have a total of $5 million that we'll be awarding out in this funding round. Applications, the max amount is limited to 750,000. Given that we have a little bit less funding, a little more limited funding than the 12 million last funding round, we didn't want to get applications that were for really high numbers, like 2, 3+ million for the 5 million available. So we're looking at applications of somewhat more modest scale, maybe compared to the last one, that we can fund and get the funds out the door quickly. Same as in past rounds, our minimum match requirement is 25%. That can be a combination of cash and in-kind. The in-kind can make up as much as 12.5% of the total match. And the cash can be a cash match from the municipalities. It can also take the form of different grants. The bank is pretty flexible. I think we pride ourselves on being a pretty flexible agency, that it can be a SNAP grant, it can be a federal, it can be state, it can be RIDEM, other grant funds that can be used to match this. So we don't have many restrictions on what can be used, as long as you have the funds on hand to then move the project forward. So MRP communities are limited to one application in this funding round. However, projects can have multiple project areas. So if you're a community looking to apply to MRP, but maybe you can't decide between one project or the other, I actually encourage folks to combine that into one application. And we've been known to do partial awards. So if there's one project that is more competitive than the other, we can fund that section of the budget and that project scope, and kind of parse that out with your review committee. So please keep that in mind when you're looking to do your applications. For this round, we're also looking for projects that we're going to be funding to be completed around June of 2026. So it's a deadline to keep in mind that for whatever you're proposing, roughly by that end date, we'd like to see the projects completed. And the link here is to Rhode website, where you can find the application forms and the Excel spreadsheet where the budget is. And I think we'll be sharing this presentation afterwards, so people can go here and they can find the link. Next, I'll go over project eligibility and competitiveness. So a lot of you are familiar, so I won't go into too much detail with MRP, but projects must address the impacts of climate change and improve community resiliency. And examples are floodproofing, green stormwater infrastructure, culvert resizing, watershed restoration, tree plantings, coastal resiliency efforts. A lot of the applications we've seen are related to green infrastructure, and a lot for working on flood proofing a lot of our critical infrastructure that is in a more danger than it has been in the past, especially with the weather we've seen in the past year and a half on Rhode Island. And last section here is about submitting competitive applications. A couple of notes I wanted to make that how folks can increase the competitiveness of their applications is that making it clear in their scope, in their narrative, what the project is, and exactly what the expected impacts will be, the flooding that would be mitigated, infrastructure that would be impacted and would be made safe through improvements, and then linking it directly to the community's resiliency efforts and tied directly to its summary of findings report from the Nature Conservancy that every municipality went through when they did the workshop process through the MRP. So making sure those links are clear in the application. Level of shovel readiness, timeline, and community track record. So like I said before, projects that are shovel ready, those generally score pretty well, and we're excited to support shovel ready projects or things that can be approaching there in a relatively short amount of time. Timeline, the June 26th, it's not an automatic no if it can't be completed by June 26th, but those that have timeline at or before would definitely be competitive applications to the bank in terms of how we can get those funds out to communities and get them spent down in a timely manner. And community track record for those municipalities that already have MRP action grants, the progress that they've made to date on the action grants for completing the projects, drawdowns in the projects, or just moving them forward for those grants, that will also be considered when making new awards. Community buy-in, project partners, we always like to see there's different project partners, whether nonprofits, other community organizations, making sure that we see interagency coordination or interdepartmental coordination with the town. So it's good to see that team effort and applications, making sure that we see that buy-in. The program is heavily focused on nature-based solutions and green stormwater infrastructure. So applications that contain those components generally score very competitively. And seeing them in the program is very beneficial for a whole host of reasons that are around the state, but something to keep in mind when we're looking at gray versus green infrastructure. And we certainly do fund a combination of gray and green, but projects that are just looking at gray infrastructure, more traditional, usually don't score as high. So I would make that note to anyone considering doing some major improvements that a combination of both could be a proven strategy. And last thing I'll mention, MRP does not fund regular repair and maintenance work of infrastructure. It has to be a direct impact from the negative impacts of climate change. So an example is like culvert resizing, or if you have a culvert that's in a state of disrepair, we can't necessarily fund it to get it back to where it was before, but you're resizing it to account for higher water flow due to higher precipitation events from climate change. That is an eligible project. So something to keep in mind there as well. And I'll give a few examples of some projects of funding. So last round we funded, this was a $2.3 million project, the Newport King Park Shoreline Resilience Project. And this is increasing their resilience to flooding along the shore, increasing resiliency to storm surge, include some plantings along the beach, fighting erosion, regrading of the shoreline, also some major repairs to the seawall there from an area that really does see a lot of major storm surge and is in danger of falling into the ocean if nothing is done. So this is a project that we're really happy to support, and I think it has just gotten underway this summer. Next is another project that we just recently funded and it just recently got underway. It's the Providence Public Street Waterfront Access Project, where you can see in the top left image there that they're looking to transform the street into something of a public greenway that will now include public access to the waterfront for a community and a part of Providence that traditionally has not really had waterfront access. I think the long-term goal there is to make it also a kayak or canoe launch point, so make it a real community amenity that didn't exist before, and then including a lot of greenery and green stormwater infrastructure where we mostly only see impervious surface now. And last project I'll mention is a cooperative project between Pawtucket and Central Falls. And this is around their new train station where it's Pine Street North, which leads right into the train stop, where they are doing improvements along the roadway between stormwater infrastructure, some permeable pavers, but it's in a district that's mostly 86% impervious surface. And so doing along the road also 3 new parklets, that's also a community amenity, making it pedestrian and user friendly. Folks actually walk to and get to and from the train station, but including a lot of greenery to fight the urban heat island effect and improve stormwater conditions.
Yeah, we think that's a great project because sometimes people think that the resiliency issue is just a coastal issue, but obviously a lot of inland areas dealing with flooding is a serious issue. So, this is a great example of how an inland community and 2 communities came together to address this issue. So when you're thinking about project eligibility, it's not just coastal. It certainly can consider inland and chronic flood areas in our urban areas as well. So this is a great project. We're very happy to fund. So, but Anthony, before you go forward, in terms of we get into the next slide. If a community had submitted an application back in the fall, we had a very broad number of applications and they didn't get funded. What type of updates would you like to see from that project application to this one? Would they have to have a major rewrite, or would they be able just to kind of provide more of a summary, application if for a previous application that was completely funded?
Yeah, good question. I would say that it depends on the scale of the application. If it was more than the cap we had at 750, we scaled down a bit to meet that threshold. But by and large, if you're at that threshold or below that, a lot of it can be copy and pasted into the new application. That we're not going to require a full new rewrite. But if you want looking to include any new components based on what we're saying today to make this application more competitive, or have any questions for us about how you can rework any applications, we're always happy to take that call or have a meeting with you guys to talk about it.
Great. And maybe you could talk about the selection committee that reviews some of these projects. Who are the other state partners that we work with in terms of ranking projects and ultimately making recommendations on which projects get awarded?
Sure. It's for Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. We're partnering with Rhode, state's chief resilience officer. We have representatives from CRMC, the Department of Health, and statewide planning. So we meet as a group a few times to go through the applications, score them based on about 5 or 6 scoring criteria listed in the application form, and a scale of 1 to 100, see which ones come to the top 10 or so, and then have a discussion from there about, can we do full awards, partial awards, and kind of talk about community impacts as well. So those that are most impactful and kind of meet the priorities that we're talking about here today generally score the best. But that's the group that will meet to discuss and go through the applications.
Right. Yeah, and then we once the applications are received, obviously we'll review them with the team in August and hopefully look to make recommendations for awards in the fall of 2024. So we definitely want to move quickly with the money being allocated and move towards projects. So thanks, Anthony. So we talked about the last funding round that we did. This last time we did an RFP for funding. We had $16 million available from the green bond, and we had $52 million in requests. So clearly the demand for resources for this type of work is growing exponentially due to the higher recognition and a higher sensitivity to resiliency projects around the country. Certainly here in Rhode Island, we've seen a lot of flooding and coastal erosion in the last few years, and I think it's on everyone's radars that this is something that is an issue that's obviously not going away. So the bank is considering developing another segment of funding for these projects, for larger scale projects. So the grant programs are great. We love giving out grant proceeds for projects that for a couple $1 million or less. We could certainly find a way to fund those. But for some communities looking at some solutions that could cost in the multi-million-dollar range. So only those problems are only going to be addressed through what we think is a revolving loan fund program, similar to the drinking water and the clean water projects programs that we have, to ultimately provide a continual source of revenue to deal with the resiliency projects. We think it will allow communities to invest in longer term planning, to devote towards the larger scale projects, to be more proactive. And then also these funding source will certainly safeguard the fiscal well-being of communities. So what we're seeing is that there's a higher acknowledgement in the finance office that these resiliency issues are not just creating budget havoc for communities having to constantly respond to flooding or whatever, but also it's threatening tax bases around the state. in terms of the value of homes that are constantly being flooded, or being threatened by sea level rise. Home insurance is becoming very, very expensive. Even if you can get it in some cases, the state of Florida is going through a very serious crisis on home insurance for flood for their situation. So, and I've got some links to some articles here that sort of highlight what the impact of high resiliency efforts are having on cities and towns around the country. These are great resources. The last one was Planning for Uncertainty that GFOA published nationally by the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank, who's really has a nice piece. I really encourage people to look at that. But the idea is that, I think we need to think about a fund, if we can get some resources from the state and put together some other resources the bank already has, they create sort of that low interest revolving loan fund program to address some of these larger scale projects that sometimes can cost tens of millions of dollars to allow communities to deal with these issues more proactively. So, back in the 80s, the federal government paid for water and sewer projects largely by grants, but that was transitioned to the revolving loan fund model back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we want to think about replicating that for resiliency projects. So, we hope to have some more details that going into 2025, but that's kind of the direction we want to see perhaps some of these funding solutions go into play there. So with that said, that's sort of the update on MRP. We'll certainly take questions at the end of this. This is my contact along with Anthony's. Certainly free to reach out to us. That you've got some time before the 26th, but the next part of the session, we want to talk a little bit about some of these federal funding opportunities coming out of the recent legislation. So we're very happy and pleased to have Melissa Labuda join us from PFM out of their Philadelphia office, who has worked with the bank, and I know PFM works with a number of communities here in Rhode Island as well as financial advisor. But there's some exciting opportunities that communities that necessarily didn't have the ability to take advantage before, but now with some changes in the IRA bill, there's opportunities for communities to access some ways to offset the costs of their clean energy projects. And there's a way that the bank can assist communities in realizing those credits and turning them into cash to help see some of the benefit up front rather than waiting for over the time. So I'm happy to introduce Melissa, who will walk us through this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here today, and it's nice to meet you all. So as Bill mentioned, I'm a director with PFM. I spend most of my time on national water and sewer issuers, as well as state revolving funds, and I spend a good bit of time on federal funding. So why don't we pop over to the next slide, Anthony? Thank you. As Bill mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act is the largest single investment in U.S. energy infrastructure. It was signed into law on August 16th, 2022. It provides $369 billion over the next decade for new and existing programs. There's potential tax incentives that touch many aspects of your communities, from installation of solar, wind, microgrid, to conversion of vehicle fleets, to efficient building upgrades. And the U.S. Treasury has been providing fairly steady guidance since December of this year. Next slide. The IRA supports energy, industry manufacturing, environmental. So think of air pollution, carbon removal. There's also an environmental justice component. When we think about buildings, it's energy efficiency, electrification, from agriculture, transportation, and of course, water. Next slide. So for the first time, eligible entities, which is an IRS term, so think of states, local governments, schools, nonprofits, are eligible to receive a payment from the IRS for building clean energy projects or making qualifying investments. This is not a competitive program for the most part. This is the opportunity to take a project that has been completed, submit a tax return, and receive a reimbursement. By filing the return and using the elective pay, you're able to receive a tax-free cash payment from the IRS. Credits are available for tax years beginning in December 31, 2022 and are through 2032. There are provisions that are both related to domestic energy and domestic labor that started in 2023. And I will say for many of us who have managed grant programs, there is a lot of monitoring and policies and procedures that you do need to take into consideration with any federal program. Next slide. So while there's a number of credits that are out there, I would just like to point out the few that may apply to schools or general governments. So Section 48 is the electricity investment tax credit. So if you have capital projects that look at solar or wind or geothermal, that tax credit may apply. Section 45 is the qualified commercial clean vehicle credit. So think of EV fleet transition vehicles, school buses, public transit. Section 30 is an alternative fuel and refueling charging property, and that is really focused in low-income communities. Next slide. With any federal program, there's typically some considerations that have to be given to the requirements. So when we think about the requirements, we've mentioned prevailing wage and domestic content. There is an apprenticeship requirement for projects that are over a certain size. There's an opportunity to stack or increase your tax refund depending on the jurisdiction of the project. And that would apply to low income and energy communities. So big picture, domestic content can be a plus or a minus. If you use tax exempt debt for your project, there's likely a haircut that will impact the tax credit that you receive. There's an opportunity to increase the value of the money you're receiving back, depending on if you're in a low-income community or an energy community. And I think when I think of three big questions from an overall perspective, when I think of the Inflation Reduction Act and project is, do these opportunities apply to my project? Have I bid the project in a way? Do my construction documents provide me the opportunity to increase the incentive, or have I missed one of the requirements and that reduces the value of the incentive? And how do I comply? Next slide. Just wanted to give a little more information on the qualified commercial clean vehicle tax credit. So if you think about electrifying your fleet, if you've purchased an EV vehicle, a light duty vehicle, there's an opportunity to receive $7,500 back per vehicle. For medium and heavy duty vehicles, so think of vehicles that are greater than 7 tons, there's an opportunity to receive up to $40,000 back. And in this specific provision under the Inflation Reduction Act, there's no requirements for critical minerals or domestic sourcing. Next slide. The alternative fuel and refueling property tax credit may also be of interest. So it's 6% of the cost of your charging stations can be received back. There's a ceiling of $100,000 per item, and it can be increased even more depending on if prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met. Now, the key thing with this provision is it has to be located in a census tract identified as non-urban or low income. Next slide. There's a lot of details on this page, but when we think of a solar project, there is an opportunity to receive the refund over a period of time, which is the production tax credit, or to receive your funds upfront via an investment tax credit. So as you're thinking about your capital projects, if you were doing a geothermal project or if you're doing solar, there's an opportunity to receive a portion of those project costs via a payment back, and that payment can be received over time or it can be received upfront. Next slide. Another part of the Inflation Reduction Act is the 179D Energy Efficient Commercial Building Tax Deduction. So this has actually been in place since 2006. It was updated in 2020, and updated again in 2022 as part of the IRA. 179D is a deduction, not a credit. And it's available for new and retrofitted buildings that may have qualifying energy efficiency improvements. So since tax exempt entities don't file a tax return, this tax deduction can typically be allocated or assigned to your general contractor, your architectural and engineering firm. And there is a process that you would have to go through to assign that deduction to another entity. And you should see the value of that if you were to assign it by a lower cost on your project. Next slide. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, energy savings are typically measured against the ASHRAE standard. So it looks at a typical modeling scenario and says this is what the energy efficiency standard is versus your designed building. And that kind of analysis establishes if you've met the criteria for the energy efficiency building standard. Next slide. So what should you be thinking about now? From your overall capital program, are there potential opportunities to reduce the cost to your tax base, your rate base, or any other entities by looking at opportunities to reduce project cost? Is there an opportunity to accelerate an EV purchase? Is there an opportunity if you have a capital project that does meet one of the criteria to add additional incentives? And it's just a matter of being aware. If you were going to pursue this type of option, I will say that having your finance team, your internal finance, your internal accounting, procurement, facilities folks, your legal team, and your engineers are all important parts of being able to successfully complete filing for a potential tax credit. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the elective pay process. So the elective pay, if we were to requires a few things. So we talked about identifying and potentially pursuing a project, the importance of collaboration in your organizations, both internally and externally. So you want to build your team. Another important part of this is understanding when to file for your refund from the federal government. It's either on your fiscal year or calendar year. In order to receive your rebate back from the federal government, you need to put your project in service. So when I think of a water project as a former water issuer, I think of when water is flowing through the pipe. So the water has to be placed in service. You complete your project, you turn it on, you're going to file some pre-registration paperwork. You're going to want to make sure through the process you're collecting documents to satisfy eligibility requirements. You're going to build your bundle of pieces of paper. You're going to file your tax return and you're going to receive your payment. Next slide. The IRS has done a great job of providing a pre-filing registration guide. It is a step-by-step overview of how you register as an entity, what information you need, and that it also gives you an opportunity to track your project through the process. Next slide. So why don't we bring this all together? What we want to think about, what credits can you take advantage of? Are there any restrictions or bonus credits that you need to consider? Do I have my team in place so that you can monetize the benefit of this program? Keep in mind that the word start of construction for larger projects under certain provisions is an important term. Working with the IRS is a two-step process. You need to pre-file after you turn your project on, and then you need to file for your payment. You're going to receive your payment after you file that tax return. And if you're going to proceed down taking advantage of this historic opportunity, start as early as you can, because it does take a lot of collaboration with internal stakeholders. So with that, I want to thank you. I appreciate your time. And I think we'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Before we turn
Absolutely.
it over, I just wanted to ask Melissa, just couple of questions. You said it's a non-competitive program, so as long as you apply and the program is up and running, there's a good chance you'll get funding for this, right?
That's absolutely correct. It's not a competitive program. You just need to register your project, submit the required documents after you've turned your project on, and you receive a tax refund, even though you don't file tax returns.
And then there's this, is there a deadline as far as when the funds when you have to apply, or when funds will be stopped being allocated to communities who do this program?
So there are some timeline considerations. After you turn your project on, it is really important to think about, if I've turned my project on in February of 2024 and my fiscal year is June 30, 2024, you have two choices. Do I file in June or do I file in December? So you want to be very aware of the timing as it relates to when you turn that project on and the date of your fiscal year versus your calendar year. From a big picture perspective, these incentives are supposed to continue for the next 10 years. And I think with, there's always political uncertainties, but again, this is a 10-year program.
Great. So one of the things we wanted to share with our, for folks who understand that we're interested in this, that as Melissa has stated, that the way that the reimbursement works is after you complete construction. So what RIB is prepared to do is, if communities are eligible for these direct pay credits, we can arrange for you to get the money sooner if you can provide evidence that you're going to get your project's eligible and you're fully expected to get the reimbursement. We can provide that interim funding to a community before, after construction complete is, because that lag can take a long time. It could be a year or so or several months, but we are looking at opportunities to assist communities to provide financing in the interim, so they don't have to wait till the end of construction. There's certain, obviously, guarantees we'll have to have in place to make that type of lending capability, but we're exploring how we can do that. And also, as Melissa had pointed out, this is a very complicated process, not something that communities are used to doing, working with accountants and different parties. We're willing to help quarterback that process at the local level for your communities. If you're certainly interested in learning more about it, RIB can provide some administrative support and technical resources to help community navigate all of the different avenues you have to go through to make sure that you're taking full advantage of these programs. So we just wanted to make that aware for people that it's something that it's not just an informational thing, which is great information, but RIB is here to provide the financing and any administrative or technical support that we need to help these communities realize these benefits. So I think, Jennifer, that's pretty much, we're done with our aspect. So if people have any specific questions, we'd be happy to address them.
That sounds great. We can do questions in a couple different ways. One is, if you have access to your microphone and would like to take yourself off of mute, we can do that. Or if you have a question, want to put it in the chat, I can make that happen too. See if there's any chats here. Or there's no questions because everything is so wonderful, wonderfully executed here.
Yeah, like I said, if people do want to learn more information on either the MRP funding or the IRS options, we're certainly willing to have one-on-one conversations with folks, on their individual circumstances.
Very good. Well, no seminar would go without Peter asking a question. So thank you, Peter.
All right.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Hi, Peter. Good.
The one thing I want to raise is that I don't know what outreach you're doing to the school districts. And, the Rhinebeck board approved $450 million worth of projects at the June 26th meeting. So there's a lot going on there. And I've been surprised. I'm not on the building committee. All I'm involved is getting the financing together. And I've had different communications from you and from our bond lawyer about these potential availability here. And obviously, as East Providence did, there's a hole in terms of part of the project is not approved for state reimbursement. But I feel I'm getting resistance from the key guy on this, who is a great person, but I think his argument is that the cost of doing qualifying projects that are eligible for the federal tax refund or whatever exceed the benefit. The cost of adding these ingredients on exceed the benefit. And they're frankly well along in the design process for planning to build 2 new high schools. So, I wonder, are you doing any reach out to any
Yeah,
of
that's a great, yeah,
the
great
school
point. You know,
projects here? Yeah,
we did have a similar conversation with Rhode, with Melissa. I
yeah,
think about a month ago, Melissa, right? You know, with Joe and Mario,
yeah,
to speak to them about this, to make them aware of it, and we've been having follow-up
yeah.
conversations with individual districts. But maybe it's if we could sort of bring in the other agency that's involved with the state financing for school bonds. We certainly I'm happy to have that conversation and see how they,
Yeah.
maybe the perception of the increased administrative expenses, aren't as significant as the potential benefit when you're talking 30% of the
I
project.
don't think it's the administrative expenses. They just feel like the cost of adding on qualifying features
Oh, okay.
exceed the benefit. I think
Oh, I understand.
that's now I've never seen numbers, but there's been resistance uh
from the
Warwick School
yeah,
Department.
right.
And the OPM just came on. I don't know what his position, what their position is, but that's just, I keep hearing about these things, and I talk to my key contact over there, and I don't see that I don't, uh, I think they're looking at total cost, and that's the focus. So,
That's the
and
case.
a lot of ways I like that, but I don't
That's the
feel
case.
like there's appetite in our
Right.
with
Yeah,
with
as the case is with most schools districts in Rhode Island, they don't necessarily have to be concerned about the financing, right? That sort of ends up on your desk, right?
right.
So there's sometimes that it's not, they don't have to share the urgency, but we certainly can follow back up a ride, and if you do have somebody in the school that we can.
Well, I mean, Ride is all would like us to do this. I'm not blaming Ride at all on this. I'm saying that there's either they're too far along, or the judgment is right that the cost benefit analysis doesn't work out for them. That's the argument I'm getting. So
no, that's something we can certainly do some more outreach for. And
I mean, I know De Silva's all over them about doing more, but I don't see it happening. So
no, that's good feedback, Peter. We could certainly think about getting in touch with people who are involved in the actual project construction, and say
yeah.
that if this is something you should take advantage of early in the planning stage, if you're looking at these alternatives.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you very much to Melissa and to our friends from RIB. Always great to partner with you, and any additional follow-ons and other opportunities for our cities and towns. I'm sure we will be happy to bring you back on and do another workshop Wednesday.
Great. We appreciate the opportunity and wish everyone has a great summer. But feel free to call us on any of these issues in the interim. So
thank you, guys. Thanks, Sean.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks
Thank you.
so much.
Melissa.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.